Hi, I'm Tony, and today we're going to learn about borders. Borders are the finishing touch to your quilt. It frames the quilt, it makes it look nice, all the things that you want. So today we're going to learn about, well, if I want to add extra borders, what size should they be, how thick should they be, and then how do I sew them on there. We're only going to be doing regular traditional borders, not mitered edges. That's going to be another video down the road. But right now, just regular borders. Let's just understand what we put on there and how we do it. The first thing you want to do whenever you add borders is make sure that your quilt is completely squared up. Even if it's a queen or a king size quilt, you need to make sure that the edges are straight. You notice how my mini quilt here, my edges are kind of all wonky and all over the place. I also have extra room at the bottom, but nothing at the top. So you have to make sure that it's ready for the borders, it's nice and straight and ready to go. So there's a couple of ways that you can square it up. I love my Stripology squared ruler. The Stripology squared ruler actually has the things in here to be able to square things up. Okay, so let's put this right in the center. And I believe, all right, that is there and there. You know what, I want to make sure I've got a little extra room. Perfect. All right, I think that is squared up on my left and right. Whoops, sorry, I hit the light. Here is, now you see how much was taken off and how nice that is and how straight that is? So let's do the other side and square this up. Obviously, if you have larger quilts, it's going to be a little bit tougher to square it up, but trust me, it is possible. Here we go. Making sure my line at the top is good. Okay, that one is good. And then let's do the bottom. Now, my top and my bottom are not going to be perfect, which is fine. Let's line this up. There we go. All right. Oh, I was worried about that. I'm gonna go ahead and use my scissors to trim this. I need to change the blade in my rotary cutter, and that's a really, really thick fabric. There we are. All right, so my quilt is all squared up. So now I need to do borders. Now in this case, I want to do my first border in this purple because I don't want the border to go right into my design up here because you want to have some negative space around your design. Especially if you're doing pixel designs, don't let it run directly into the border. Please give some negative space to frame it. So what size should it be? This is where a lot of people get messed up, is the sizing. So we're going to take a look at these squares. These squares here are only 1 inch finished squares. So anything that's a multiple of 1, I could do for that first one. So let's do a 2 inch. So let's cut our fabric 2.5 inches. Because if I want a 2 inch finished border, we have to add a 1/2 inch for the 1/4 inch seams on either side. Now, all of this border math and information can be found in my How to Design Pixel Quilts book if you don't want to figure out the math for yourself. So it's all in there, so you can do that. So in this case, like I said, I'm going to cut a 2.5 inch border. Of course, I'm going to iron my fabric before I add it in. Now, I'm going to show you 2 different ways of doing borders. The first way is the way you're actually supposed to do it. And then the second way is the cheater way that I do. So this first border, I'm going to show you exactly what you're supposed to do in order to help square up your quilt nicely. And then the second way, we'll do the cheater way that I do for most of my stuff. All right, so let's put the iron away and put the pad away and look at our quilt. So I'm going to do the left and the right borders first. So left and the right borders, what I need to do is measure this side. So this side is exactly 10 inches long. This side, oh, I'm good, is exactly 10 inches long. Now, let's say theoretically, if this side was 10 inches long and this side was 11 inches long, well, that's a problem. And especially in bigger quilts, you're going to get different different lengths because your fabric stretches, things change. So if this was 10 and this was 11, what you do is you add these numbers together, divide them by 2. And that is exactly how long you cut your pieces. So you would cut them 10.5 pieces, 10.5 inches. Now in my case, it is exactly 10 inches. So I'm going to cut 10-inch strips. So here is my first one. So I'm cutting it exactly 10 inches because, well, that's the average of the two. They're both 10 inches. So there's my first 10-inch piece. There is my second 10-inch piece. Set that aside. So then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my 10-inch piece here. And technically you can see it's not exactly 10 inches. See, I have another little piece over here. So this is probably actually 10 and a little bit. So I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to line it up on the left right there. And then I'm going to on the very left, and then I'm going to line it up on the very right. So that is now 10 inches. And then what I'm going to do is stretch the bottom. So you see here, remember that bottom was a little bit longer than that top. So what you do is you stretch it and put a pin in the center. Now this is helpful whenever you're dealing with larger quilts. You always want to do the left, the right, kind of smooth out the whole thing, put a pin in the center. And then I'm only working with this part of the quilt now. Same exact thing, smooth it out, make sure everything is all lined up, put a pin in the center. And then you keep centering, centering, centering until you get down to an area. So when you get down to a small enough area, then you go on to the next area, work on that area. Now I'm done with this half of the quilt, I'm going to move to this half of the quilt. So smoothing it out, putting a pin in it. Let's say if this is a larger quilt and I had to keep going, I'd smooth this out, put a pin in it, and then go back to this area. Smooth this out, put a pin in it. And then now, as you see, there's no gap. Remember I showed you that gap that was there? There's no gap there. Let's do it with the same on the other side. Now remember, if it's the average, theoretically I said what if the one side was 10.5 and then the other side, what if one side was 10, the other side was 11, and I was cutting these 10.5? So in this case, maybe the top was shorter than the bottom. In this case, the top is going to be longer than the bottom. You do the same thing. You stretch and move your fabric to be that 10.5 inches. So you line it up on the left and the right, smooth it, put it in the center. Work on one side, smooth it, put it in the center. Keep working until that half of the quilt's done, shift to the other half. Smooth it, keep working on it. And then the next step I'm going to do, that I'll do off camera, is I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam here, a 1/4 inch seam here, and then we will come back to iron it open and add the other border, other side. All right, let's iron our border open. There we are. Okay, so now let's do the top and the bottom. So the same exact thing for this first border. Remember, I'm showing you what you're supposed to be doing. So we need to do the top and the bottom. Because we are putting a top and a bottom on here for a border, I need to measure the top and the bottom. So this one is 12.5 inches. Let's check the other side. 12 3/4. Ooh, that's interesting. And then this one is, about 12, yeah, a little over 12.5. Okay, so I have two options at this point because I have two different things. I have 12 3/4 and 12.5. I can square it up so that it's exactly the same. It's exactly 12.5 or 12 3/4, because what's happening is that as I ironed it, it kind of went wibbly wobbly a little bit. Not timey-wimey, just a little wibbly wobbly. So, or I can just say, you know what, let's just do 12.5 or 12 3/4. I'm going to go 12.5. So let's take our fabrics and let's cut 12.5-inch strips. All right, there we are. So 12.5. Here we are. Perfect. And I don't think I have, nope, it is not long enough, which is why I got a second strip. When I was doing my math, I was like, I don't think this is going to be one strip. I think I'm going to have to use a second strip. All right, so let's cut 12.5. There we are. Perfect. And now, same exact thing. So I'm going to line this up on the left and the right. And this will square the quilt up so that it's going to measure the same on both sides. So let's flatten this out, put a pin in the center, move it over. I'm going to flatten this out, put a pin in the center here. You know what? I'm going to keep on going because this is a pretty thick quilt. I want to make sure I don't get any puckers in it. And that's the whole point of why you're stretching your fabric and moving it, because you're trying to avoid puckers. There we are. There we are. And then on this side. So same exact thing. I'm going to, and as you see here, I've got extra fabric over here that we're going to be working with. So let's put that one there, and let's smooth this out and put the pin in the side over here. Okay, so now I'm going to stretch this and put a pin in the center. And remember, this is the side that was 12 3/4. So my top fabric is a little bit shorter than my bottom fabric, but we're making this work. We're making sure that everything's going to line up nicely. And all the math will be nicely done for us. There we are. Okay, so same exact thing of what I just showed you before. I'm going to go back and I'm going to sew this side, and I'm going to go ahead and iron it open for you. You saw how I ironed the other ones. And we'll come back and I'll do the second border and I'll show you the cheater way. Oh, I really like how this border turned out. This is, of course, I sit and I pick all of the little threads off of my quilt just by habit. All right, so the second border I want to do is this really nice light blue that I have in the quilt. And remember, this is going to be the cheater way. This is a different way of doing borders. This is the way that I do borders, that I love doing borders because it's super easy. Your quilt will not be perfectly squared up. So right now, if I were to measure my quilt, my length of my top is the same as my bottom. My left is the same as my right. So I've squared everything up just by using those borders and making it nice. So this way does not do it. Your quilt will be a little wibbly wobbly. It will be a little funky. But if you're not entering into a quilt competition and it's for yourself or a gift, then this is the easy, super easy way of doing it. Again, the cheater way. So let's take a look at it. First, I need to decide how big do I want my border. These here are going to be 2-inch finished. So let me decide, what do I want for this one? Do I want, and this is a great way that I like to see how it's going to look against the quilt. So do I want another 2-inch border? And that's what it would look like there. Oh, that is nice. Do I want a 1-inch border? Just kind of a cute little thing. And then I could do a black binding, or maybe this blue is a binding. Or do I want to go all out and do a 4-inch border? If I do a 4-inch border, it would be more like a picture frame that would have the larger within the center. You know what? I think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to go with a 4-inch border. So I'm going to cut these strips here 4.5 inches. I'm going to cut 2 strips, iron them, and be back to show you how to pin it on there. Cheater way! Okay, so I remember I finished with the top and the bottom. So to be consistent, I'm going to do the left and the right first for adding on my borders. All right, so here's my ironed 4.5-inch strip. Because remember, 1/4 inch seam, 1/4 inch seam. So I want a 4-inch border plus the 2 1/4 inches is a 4.5. There's no measuring, there's no cutting. I don't care how big this is. I don't care any of that stuff. I'm just going to lay this down and pin it. Like literally just taking my piece of fabric, laying it on here, pinning it on here. I don't care how much I use. Although I do want to pin the 2 seams of where the previous border is. And then on the end. And then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut it. And then I'm going to take this and flip this over and do the other side. See, this is what I mean by the cheater way. Now, it's not going to square it up. It's not going to be nice. But you're going to have borders on there, and it's quick and easy. I especially like doing this for my larger quilts that I don't want to deal with having to smooth and do math and figure out any of that stuff. Now remember, if you are entering your quilt into a competition, please do it the first way that you're supposed to do. They will take a look at your quilt to see if it's balanced, to see if it measures correctly, all sorts of things. This is a great cheater for you to do for your own quilts or for gifts or for other things. Now with the cheater way, you notice there's some extra fabric now here on either side. So what I need to do at this point is trim it off. So I'm going to line up my fabric and trim those edges. Do not leave the edges there. Trust me, it causes all sorts of issues and problems, especially if whenever you go to quilt your quilts. So line this up. There we are. Perfect. And now I can turn this and add on my bottom and my top border. So same exact thing. I'm laying this down. Now in this case, because it's longer, I'm going to pin at the seams first, just to make it nice and neat and have it lay out nice. There we are, and then I'm going to pin in here. Okay, same thing as I did before. I'm going to trim and turn it around and do the other side. Let's do the seams, the edges. Let's smooth this down. Let's do the seam and the edges. I never seem to pin this the same way each time. Sometimes I like going left to right. Sometimes I like going right to left. Sometimes I like doing the seams. Honestly, it's whatever you are comfortable with. All right, so I'm going to sew this and iron this and then come back for the last trimming. Now, I'm not showing you my sewing, but all I'm doing is sewing these with a 1/4 inch seam. Because remember when I said that we're doing our math of how big to do our strips, we're adding a 1/2 inch for a 1/4 inch seam on either side. So make sure that you are sewing them with a 1/4 inch seam. Now you also don't have to do the ratios of what I suggest in my book and what I've said here of a percent. So in this case it's a 1 inch, so I did this border at 2 and this border at 4. You don't have to have them relative, it just looks a lot nicer whenever you do. Ask anyone that does framing, that does artwork. It's the same methods and it's the same thought process. If it's a ratio, so for example, if I have, let's say 1.5 inch blocks, then I can do 3 inch borders. Basically, I want to do multiples of 1.5. And that just frames it nicely and it just makes it look good. So again, you don't have to. Do whatever you want. It just looks nicer whenever you do it that way. And there we have our finished quilt with our different borders. And that is how we do borders. He's so cute. I love these colors, how they turned out. It's fantastic. So hopefully you learn how to add borders to your quilt today. Both the way that you're supposed to do it and then my cheater way. Please don't forget to like this video, follow my YouTube as well as my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and don't forget about Twitch, where I sew live and you can interact with me.